This moment is the conception of Lelouch the demon. This horrific scene is the origin of world peace. Code Geass is a show I appreciate more on each rewatch. Every time I revisit it, the level of attention to detail on display results in me finding something new. One example could be found in the very first episode, in the scene where Lelouch plays a game of chess against an unnamed Britannian noble.
Oh, now wait a minute! You can't win this one, it's impossible, right?
Rival says you can't win this, because he's looking at White's strong pass pawns on the C file. If White can play C takes B7, he'll have 2 pawns on the B and C files, and Black will have no pawns to stand in their way. Plus they'll have the support of the strong rook on the B file. It's difficult to prevent these pawns from their queen the coronation. It's clear from the noble's expression that he was also focused on a strong attack. The Black queen is close to the White king, but Rivals and a noble may have even noticed that queen to G2 doesn't work because the White knight is guarding that square. To take a temporary tangent, there's some symbolic foreshadowing at play on the board that I really like here. The White knight is protecting the king from being checkmated, just like Suzaku prevents Lelouch from defeating Clovis's nightmare forces in the upcoming episodes. In that battle, Lelouch is in a winning position against Clovis, but Suzaku swoops in at the last moment and interrupts Lelouch's attack. The White knight single-handedly prevents the checkmate. The episode where Suzaku boards the Lancelot and fights Lelouch is even called The White Knight Awakens. It's really cool that this specific position was chosen for a reason. Black can't just get the checkmate in 1 here, but he does have an unstoppable mate in 4. Lelouch was the only one in the room who spotted it. The first move you have to make for this strategy to work is actually king to g6. You want to make room for your rook on the h file. If you go for king to g7, it allows for knight to f5 check, which, with imprecise play, can allow for white to escape here. He doesn't move the rook first because that would make his plan obvious to the noble, and he might try to somehow intervene. Lelouch realizes that his attack on the king side will be faster than the influence of the queen side pawns, so he makes room for his rook on the h file, preparing to allow the queen to checkmate the white king on h1 by supporting it with the rook. Just like he does in his battle against Clovis, Lelouch maneuvers around the white knight to checkmate the king. The noble, failing to see the impending checkmate, mocks Lelouch for starting with the king because he thinks the best move to play here is b takes c6. This would relinquish the b file to white's rook, but it would stop the threat of the white pawn's queening. Lelouch not playing this move tells the noble that he doesn't know what he's doing. Even assuming the noble saw the threat, which he clearly didn't after the first move, there's actually nothing the noble can do to escape checkmate in this position, assuming Lelouch plays the best moves. Lelouch will play rook to h8, then after the noble's next move, Lelouch simply plays queen to h1 and it's checkmate. To be perfectly honest, this is a fairly simple tactic that most chess players would recognize. However, most people inexperienced in chess probably wouldn't. The fact that Lelouch saw the tactic isn't so much the point of this scene as the fact that he can instantly read that no one else in the room sees it. This scene demonstrates both that Lelouch can spot a good chess tactic, indicating that he's a good player, and that he can read a room naturally, indicating natural intelligence and a possession of observational skills. All of this says to me that the people behind this show were willing to put a lot of work into this episode. They wanted to put their best foot forward and pay this much attention even to the little details. I specify that this is them putting their best foot forward because this show isn't always this good with its attention to chess on the screen. They really wanted to establish that there is importance to the symbolic chess undertones of the series, but the show doesn't actually care about chess. It just cares about the fact that Lelouch cares about chess. Most of the chess games in this show are scenes that are usually about something else more than the chess game itself, and the only notable exception is this game in the first episode. For example, the first game Lelouch plays with Mao before he learns who he is. C2 described that Lelouch could never beat Mao. C2 is naturally pretty good at seeing through most people, and Lelouch is completely honest with her, so she has a very good grasp of his personality even this early into the series. Mao later explains what she means.
I'm afraid you're not the type of person who can keep your mind empty. There's a part of you that's a critic, constantly watching your own moves. And there's another part that's an observer, watching the critic, watching you.
They're both telling the truth. This is all consistent with Lelouch's characterization. If Lelouch played like Schneisel, he could probably beat Mao, even despite his Geass, because a strong chess player will focus on playing moves that simply improve their own position. However, against opponents that Lelouch considers to be strong, he tends to go for traps and strategies that they don't see coming. Because of Lelouch's nature, as described by Mao, Lelouch is constantly looking for the weaknesses in his own moves, so he's continuously taking these calculated risks, and Mao only has to look into his head to see those calculations. Similarly to Clovis, rather than try to oppose a strength he can't beat, Lelouch wins against Mao by finding an opening and making an attack of his own. However, in their chess games, Mao wins against Lelouch every time because Lelouch tells him how to do so, even though he knows that's what he's doing and wants to stop. The actual games we see only serve as a backdrop to this struggle. Instead of focusing on the games, Code Geass uses these scenes as opportunities to discuss Lelouch's psychology. The difference in focus between the chess scenes with this rogue rapscallion and the chess scene with the unnamed noble in episode 1 is explained by the fact that, as discussed in my Importance of Mao video, Mao was, in part, designed to illuminate this part of Lelouch's characterization characterization for the audience. Even the frankly criminal chess scene between Schneisel and Lelouch is meant to serve a purpose for which the game itself only serves as a backdrop. The game itself is made the butt of jokes for the fact that the pieces seem to pop in and out of existence, but as they rarely are in this show, this game isn't just a chess game. It was meant to demonstrate two things. First, that Lelouch hesitated to seize an easy victory because he thought the win would reflect poorly on him, so that it would set up a parallel when Schneisel does the same thing on the battlefield. And second, Schneisel's lack of a will to win. Schneisel was prepared to throw away a draw and take a loss in their chess game just to get some insight on Zero's personality. This information contributes to Lelouch's eventual victory. Code Geass still has good writing even when it isn't paying attention to the actual chess it's showing, so I can forgive it, but I would like this scene even more if a sequence of Lelouch and Schneisel presumably just moving their kings one space forward on the board wasn't followed by both characters claiming that they're approaching threefold repetition. Schneisel's frequently depicted as the man most likely to beat Zero. The fact that Lelouch could never beat Schneisel in chess is brought up often, even though the last time they played together was when Lelouch was like 10 years old. And Schneisel is about 8 years older than Lelouch according to Wikipedia, so it was literally a case of a young adult playing a child. If anything, the fact that they played at all is indicative of Lelouch potentially being a chess prodigy. That said, because of those games, Lelouch has a high opinion of Schneisel's ability. He'll often comment on how strong of an opponent Schneisel is, while Schneisel continues to regard Zero and eventually Lelouch with confidence. In truth, Lelouch and Schneisel are very nearly equal in mental ability. They're very good at predicting how others will think and act. They're very good at lying to and manipulating those around them in order to get valuable people on their side as well. They're also both mildly sadistic at times, and like to completely dominate their enemies with grandiose, unexpected strategies. In many ways, they have very similar strengths. However, Schneisel and Lelouch don't operate in exactly the same way. Unlike most of Lelouch's enemies in command, Schneisel's strength comes not just from his tactical skill, but from his strategic ability to achieve his objectives regardless of the resistance you put up. A fitting final boss for Lelouch of the Rebellion. Even if you anticipate his plan and try to avoid it, he'll continue towards his objective, and whatever move you try to make will fail to stop him. The ability to successfully achieve an objective is often cited by grandmasters of chess as the difference between a won and a lost game, and a good chess player and a great one. After all, even if you get a good position, if you lack the ability to identify how to use that advantage, you won't win. Schneisel knows how to identify a path to victory that the enemy can't do anything to prevent. He knows how to identify how they'll try to resist and take advantage of their plan. For a character with a strategic mind that Lelouch can't beat, this is a great playstyle. It also makes sense for a character who's used to being the smartest guy in the room to play this way. This style of thinking is consistent with Schneisel's actions throughout the series, which are mostly moves that will strengthen his organization or weaken the enemies. Lelouch's playstyle incorporates elements of Schneisel's but is ultimately notably different, and what's more, we can actually speculate as to why. Lelouch learned how to play chess, which he applies to his general strategies, from playing against at least Schneisel, who was stronger than him. For someone new to the game who doesn't know quite what they're doing, Schneisel's playstyle would be very oppressive. All he could try to do is defend against Schneisel's plan, but Schneisel would be able to see through every attempted defense Lelouch could muster. Eventually, rather than try to defend against Schneisel's attack, Lelouch learned to see through Schneisel's plan, and rather than trying to stop him, he finds an opening for his own attack. This also explains why Lelouch likes to play from the black side on a chessboard. Because you have to play second, you're more suited to counterattacks that take advantage of early aggression. Like with Schneisel, this mindset is visible in many of Lelouch's actions throughout the show. He often allows someone else to make the first move so that he can counter with a brilliant move that they couldn't foresee. In the end, this is even how he defeats Schneisel. Lelouch and Schneisel both have consistent characterization that is informed by how they play chess, and that makes sense given their character histories. And the rivalry has a great impact on Lelouch's personality. Lelouch has multiple masks. To the student council, he's Lelouch Lamperouge, the Shikamaru of the group, the genius peer who wastes his potential with games out of boredom. To Nunnally, he's a strong, kind, and caring older brother who will help and protect her at all costs. He is all of these things, but he uses these attributes to hide those other qualities of his personality. But to crusade against Britannia, Lelouch establishes a new mask for himself, the more literal Mask of Zero. Zero is an enemy of Britannia who hates the Britannian royal family and who wants to promote justice even if he has to be a villain to do so. But Lelouch isn't a villain. In episode 42, Lelouch is prepared to face any and every humiliation before Suzaku in exchange for Nunnally's safety. That's what he cares about most. Lelouch and Suzaku finally drop the pretense and admit to each other that they're enemies. Except Lelouch does it because he sees Suzaku as a friend, or wishes he could still see him as one. He wholeheartedly believes that Suzaku will protect Nunnally, so he's willing to do anything to ensure that he does. When they see each other next, Suzaku intensely interrogates Lelouch. He comes at him with all the anger and hatred and resentment that he's built up for Zero all this time, and he makes him pay for it by hurting him and guilt-tripping him at the same time. Lelouch doesn't really resist because he expects all of this and because he wants to make it part of his atonement for his sins, because he's begging Suzaku for a favor. Suzaku brings up everything he's been thinking about all this time, everything he's wanted to ask Lelouch if he really was Zero again. We find out the one question he wanted an answer to most was, why did you order me to live? He's played through that moment many times in his head, and he questions why the same Lelouch that committed such atrocities as masterminding the incident, causing Shirley's death after they just publicly started dating, and sacrificing countless lives as Zero just to achieve his own ends, would bother protecting his life. His questions reveal that he's unable to reconcile Zero's heartless actions with the ones that have protected people that Lelouch Lamperouge called his friends. Lelouch is good at predicting how people think, so he knows that the last thing Suzaku wants to hear from him is another excuse. He also probably knows that Suzaku will see through his tendency to demonize himself in his answers and realize that he's actually lying. And Suzaku does exactly that. He sees that Lelouch is doing what he once did after killing his father, and bearing the pain of humiliating shame and guilt, even beyond what he actually deserves, because what he did do overshadows the little details, and he's trying to atone by bearing the blame for it all. Suzaku asks Lelouch if he's lying, but he actually plays along here. He tells Lelouch that the only way to atone for the lies he told is to make the lies into the truth. He's speaking from the perspective of someone who sees Lelouch as the demon behind Zero. But for a moment, he makes it clear that he understands. He instructs Lelouch to bring an end to the war and bring peace to the world, and in return, Suzaku agrees to protect Nunnally. What I'd like to bring to your attention is that Lelouch is actually lying. He was actually trying to protect the people he cared about the entire time. That's what's so unique about Lelouch. He manipulates people, kills them, lies to them, commits every necessary despicable act, but he never stops genuinely caring. Suzaku sees through this, so he's willing to potentially give Lelouch another chance. If Lelouch really does care enough about Nunnally to give up his ambitions, Suzaku might be willing to actually forgive him. For Lelouch in that moment, who feels like he's lost everything at this point, the prospect of being genuinely forgiven by Suzaku, who sees the demon within him, seems good enough to Lelouch to make everything worth it. In an unfortunate series of events, Suzaku seemingly betrays him. Lelouch decides to change his mind and heeds Suzaku's words, to make the lie the truth. He'll become the demon. He'll become cold and callous.
I was wrong to think that I could depend on sympathy. Cold and callous, that's the prescription. Unless I keep myself perfectly in this frame of mind, I won't be able to take Nunnally back.
Lelouch does admit to wearing masks. He claims that everyone does. But that's not necessarily a bad thing in his mind. He believes we do it out of necessity. It helps us get along with each other, pretending to be something more socially acceptable than we truly are deep down. If we didn't wear masks and lie to protect one another, we couldn't even form communities without them falling apart. This is a common defense of the concept of deception, and one Lelouch offers without taking much time to think about it. He questions, what even is one's true face? What if every face is just a mask? But his father, Emperor Charles, disagrees. He wants to create a world where lies won't need to exist. He argues that once we stop lying to each other, we'll be able to truly understand each other, and conflict will ultimately disappear. In this ideal world, death will be obsolete. Lelouch believes that the world Charles is trying to create will be a world of stagnation where nothing actually occurs. He calls it a world of memories. He, C2, and Suzaku all recognize that forcing everyone to live in a world without death will eventually lead to everyone feeling unfulfilled, and everyone feeling the way Suzaku and C2 do right now, wanting to die but being unable to do so. And Lelouch and Suzaku both have people who have died that they miss, but they don't take this opportunity to see those people again, despite how happy it would make them in the short term, because Lelouch and Suzaku have determined that none of them would want to live in the world the Emperor is trying to create. Continuing their earlier conversation, Lelouch then explains to his parents that lies can be a good force as well. Lelouch asserts that people lie not just because they're in conflict, but also because they want something. He believes that forcing everyone to abandon their masks will actually make them less happy, because they won't be able to pursue those desires anymore, as the world will become stagnant. Lelouch believes that, in a way, Nunnally's smile was a mask, and Lelouch calls it beautiful. He values that mask, and he loathes his parents for lacking the real love for his sister that he feels, as evidenced by their lack of appreciation for Nunnally's wholesomeness. Lelouch has his own world to forge, Nunnally's world. Lelouch and Suzaku make a contract. Make the ends justify the means. No matter what it takes, create the better world in the name of which all of this violence has occurred. So now Lelouch has to create a new mask, the Mask of the Demon. To those outside Lelouch's closest circle, he was the man who manipulated the Black Knights and the Japanese people to fight for his whims as Zero, and now manipulates Britannia for the same reasons. While wearing the Mask of Zero, Lelouch commits many atrocities over the course of the series, but he always claimed that it was for the good of Japan. The demon claims that all of his despicable acts are being committed solely for his own amusement. Lelouch is determined to become an even more evil figure. While acting as Zero, Lelouch often had to hide the evil acts he was committing from those that followed him, because he was attempting to become a figure of justice. Now, as the demon, he has to commit atrocities beyond what he would normally perform to build a legacy of oppressive evil. That said, the demon is no different from any of Lelouch's other masks. It highlights the true aspects of his personality that he wants to highlight to the person for whom he wears it, and hides the rest. Lelouch wants the world to see him as the man who grabs power for his own whims because he acknowledges that it is what what he's doing, and to distract from the truth of the fact that he's doing it all for their own benefit. Emperor Charles, the Ozai of Code Geass, is no longer an antagonist in the series. At the beginning, Charles sort of seemed like the final opponent Lelouch would have to face, but that role never really fit him in my opinion. Charles was disinterested in the world, and the struggle of Zero that the entire show was about. Schneisel even criticizes Charles for this exact mindset multiple times, showing that the writers were aware of this issue. Charles was too indifferent to Lelouch for the final battle between them to be climactic enough, so instead of him, the show chooses Schneisel to be Lelouch's final opponent, the rival that had been fighting against him for most of the series anyway. Schneisel instantly learns that the Emperor is dead. Now that Charles is out of the way, Schneisel is holding the White King. The final confrontation will come down to a game between Lelouch and Schneisel for the fate of the world.
I understand everything, but now I'm the one controlling the game.
For most of the series, up until her presumed death, Nunnally was Lelouch's weakness. After her death, and after Lelouch killed his parents, he and Suzaku decided the best way for them to repent for their sins was to commit to the lie and wear the mask to the end. They act as men who will cruelly take whatever they want, no matter the consequences, to create the gentler world they had done everything up to that point to achieve. This was how to achieve Nunnally's dream. So when Nunnally is revealed to be alive and ultimately becomes an obstacle thanks to Schneisel turning her against him, Lelouch instantly understands that it changes nothing. His conviction at this point is stronger than it's ever been. Not very long ago, he would have yelled at C2 for even suggesting that he should fight Nunnally. And here, he embraces the mask, and denounces his love for her, claiming that everything he's done up until now has been to attain power for his own sake. He's committing to the lie, and choosing to fight Nunnally, because now this is bigger than him or her. Still, this isn't an easy decision to make. Having to reconcile lying directly to Nunnally, and threatening her, causing her all that emotional turmoil, and becoming someone that she despises in the process all visibly takes a toll on Lelouch. This is the only thing left that could possibly give him pause. While Lelouch believes that people tend to desire peace, Schneisel believes that peace is only an illusion. He plans to discipline all of humanity through force with the Damocles to make that illusion reality. This is what the late Emperor Charles dubbed Schneisel's world in his final words to Lelouch before being erased. To create Nunnally's world, Lelouch will have to stop Schneisel's world from being creative, just like he stopped Charles. It's the final showdown. Lelouch and Schneisel both understand that when one side wins, the fighting will end, and this battle will determine the winner of the war. Lelouch makes his first preparation, flashing his possession of high-profile hostages to protect his vessel from immediate direct flare fire. Schneisel predicted this move, however, so he uses the opportunity to leverage control of the Black Knights. With this, the board is set. Schneisel and Lelouch are opponents of equal strength. Schneisel attacks first, metaphorically solidifying himself as white on the chessboard. His plan is to surround Lelouch's forces. Lelouch goes for a slightly more sophisticated tactic, trying to goad Schneisel to attack, which he was prepared for. But Schneisel sees through this trap instantly and stops his advance. After this, they both reposition themselves. Schneisel tries to gain the high ground, so Lelouch counters by preparing his anti-air units. It's exactly like playing an opening in a chess match. Both sides are just trying to gain an advantageous position before the fighting begins. Eventually, Schneisel improves his position enough that his attempt to surround Lelouch's forces actually comes to fruition. Not only are Schneisel and Lelouch's political tactics and strategies influenced by their chess playstyles, but even how they go to war in their final battle is. Despite Lelouch's attempts to stop Schneisel's advance, Schneisel eventually gets to the exact position he sought in the first place, and rather than continuing to try to stop him, Lelouch simply attacks Schneisel's weak center. It's actually considered better in chess to respond to threats by attacking with an even more immediate threat than simply defending, which is exactly what Lelouch elects to do. Schneisel, however, completely expected this. He deploys the Black Knights, knowing that Lelouch lacks enough strong nightmare pilots to deal with their might, expecting that this will make his attack faster than Lelouch's. Lelouch does indeed get pressured quite a bit by the Black Knight's strength, but he reveals a countermeasure he had prepared for their interference, wiping out most of the Black Knight's forces in one fell swoop. He blows up the Securidite mines, creating massive destruction, but unfortunately some of his troops were caught in the explosion as well. Lelouch sacrifices a piece and a couple pawns to stop Schneisel's threatening attack on his flank, but while Lelouch just threw away a weapon, one is opened up for Schneisel's use. With the Black Knights gone, he can build the flare fearlessly. Schneisel still has the advantage. Lelouch was almost surprised at how early Schneisel had chosen to use the flare warheads, but he was even prepared for things getting this disadvantageous, and he had already calculated the line following this move. This is why Lelouch recruited Nina. He knew that Schneisel would rely on the strength of the flares after the loss of the Black Knights, because without the Damocles in its arsenal, Britannia is stronger in terms of military might. So he sought out a countermeasure to the flare. But not all is going swimmingly for Lelouch. Schneisel had sent the surviving remnants of the Black Knights to attack the Avalon directly. Lelouch's attack attempts to breach the Damocles have also proven fruitless, thanks to a particularly strong Blaze Luminous. As Lelouch observed in the very first episode, real battle is different. While Lelouch is dealing with the Black Knights, Schneisel contemplates when to use the Flaya next. Schneisel even says that using it would be too greedy. Both Schneisel and Lelouch are obviously treating this battle like an actual chess game. When Lelouch enters the battlefield, Schneisel believes that he's basically forfeiting the game and attempts to finish it with a Flaya. In this moment, he opens the Blaze Luminous, which is exactly what Lelouch wants. But first, he has to activate the countermeasure that he prepared. The way this works is actually a perfect parallel to Lelouch's philosophy, stated in the very first episode. In the metaphorical game between Lelouch and Schneisel, this is when Lelouch decides to lead with the king. He's the first one to put his life on the line by approaching the Flaya to collect and input necessary data, and only after he's succeeded does Suzaku throw the spear that nullifies the Flaya. Then Lelouch uses the opportunity from Schneisel's previous move, the Open Blaze Luminous, to infiltrate Schneisel's fortress. Lelouch lets Schneisel achieve his goals of infiltrating the Avalon and even firing a Flaya directly at him, just to create an opening for him to board the Damocles. At this point, Schneisel is willing to grant Lelouch this tactical victory. But he even predicted that Lelouch would expose his king, as he has, and prepared a plan to take advantage of that target. Schneisel is willing to destroy Damocles to take Lelouch with it. After the Damocles and the Flayas are destroyed, he'll simply find a new organization to rebuild those weapons for him and resume his plan. Kennen points out that this is effectively terrorism, considering that they'll probably be turning towards shady organizations to achieve that end. But Schneisel kinda just shrugs it off. To help slow Lelouch down, Schneisel kept Gino as his ace in the hole, the last remaining knight of the rounds besides Anya and Suzaku himself. Lelouch predicts Schneisel's move. You may be noticing a pattern here. He actually pre-recorded an entire conversation to play it when Schneisel was in place, using the same trick he did against Colin and Mao. When Schneisel sees the recording of Lelouch, he admits defeat, but he actually thinks this is a stalemate. He thinks that Lelouch plans to kill him, but the Flayas will still detonate and destroy the Damocles with him on board. Schneisel decides to use this opportunity to distract Lelouch, so that their game can come to a climactic conclusion. Lelouch and Schneisel finally engage in philosophical discourse. Kinda. Everything Lelouch was saying was pre-recorded, but we as the audience get to hear their thoughts right before the climax of the final battle. Lelouch asks if Schneisel wanted to use the Damocles to rule the world. Schneisel insists that he just wanted to create the kind of peaceful world that everyone desires. Lelouch suggests that he would be disregarding human nature, and Schneisel claims that it's a matter of opinion. Schneisel has gone on record claiming that human nature is to desire a king to solve everyone's problems, so by forcing the world into peace, he's doing exactly what he believes the people want. Lelouch tells Schneisel that such a world would stagnate, like he once told Charles, and that the people in his world wouldn't truly be living. He repeats the message that he first connected with C2 over, that a life without meaning, a life of just experiences, isn't worth living. Lelouch rejects Schneisel's plan because he feels that oppressing the will of humanity by forcing them to live under Schneisel's thumb, while potentially creating peace, wouldn't make anyone happier. This is why he opposes Schneisel's brand of peace. Schneisel simply states that if you string experiences together, you get knowledge. Rather than ask him to elaborate and maybe explain why the hell he even brings that up, Lelouch just changes the subject because he's a pre-recorded message. He claims that while his father sought the past, Schneisel seeks the present and he seeks the future. Schneisel doesn't seem to disagree, and he just replies that the future could be worse than the present. Lelouch insists that it'll definitely be better, because no matter how long it takes, human nature is truly to seek happiness for oneself. This is the fundamental difference between Schneisel's and Lelouch's philosophies that creates such a rift in the worlds they seek to create. They disagree on what human nature truly is, and subsequently disagree on what must be done to best suit everyone's desires. Schneisel criticizes Lelouch for being too emotional, but Lelouch argues that the difference between them is because one of them lived among the common people and genuinely cared for them, while the other only ever viewed them from on high as a member of the Britannian royal family. Lelouch says that he's seen the existence of hope and the purity of the wish for happiness, and it compels him. Schneisel criticizes Lelouch again, but for hypocrisy, claiming that Lelouch uses his Geass to subjugate people's will, but then affirms its virtue in a philosophical debate. Schneisel begins to smirk at Lelouch, finding amusement in the fate that he believes awaits them, both dying in the battle for control of the world. At the beginning of the battle, Schneisel proudly told Jinkei that he's never lost against Lelouch. Schneisel was expecting to win, but he was prepared to accept the results even if they both lost, because at least that would bring a kind of peace too. He plans to destroy the Damocles and the Flayas with both of them on board. Schneisel only came up with this last resort because he knew that Lelouch would try to board the Damocles personally when the Avalon is compromised by the Black Knights. It's actually crucial to Lelouch's success here that he predicts this mentality from Schneisel. You might be tempted to argue that Lelouch pressuring Schneisel into blowing himself up is a type of victory, but in chess, both sides get the same points for a draw regardless of who's in the winning position. Lelouch reveals that he had other plans. He appears in person and casts Geass on Schneisel, his biggest advantage. Since learning of the existence of Geass, Schneisel had completely avoided any face-to-face contact with Lelouch, but Lelouch managed to bait Schneisel in with one last tactic, his ability to predict what his enemy will say, and Schneisel fell for it. Schneisel thought that he was the one biding for time, occupying Lelouch's attention so he doesn't realize that the Flay is about to destroy the Damocles and kill them both. In truth, Lelouch was the one distracting everyone in the room so he could subtly enter and cast his Geass on Schneisel. Lelouch hadn't only won, but he was also preparing for the next step of his plan after the battle was over. As I discussed in my video, Code Geass and the Great Man Theory, Lelouch made Schneisel into a vital pawn in ensuring world peace after the Zero Requiem. Lelouch's absolute victory in this battle wasn't only necessary for his surviving, it was also necessary for the Zero Requiem and creating the world which he sought to create all along, which again is Lelouch's primary motivation. And that was the end of the rivalry between Schneisel and Lelouch. Just like the very first game that Lelouch plays in the beginning, Lelouch wins by maneuvering around the enemy, completely disregarding their threats and checkmating them with a move they never saw coming. When we consider the differences between Lelouch and Schneisel, it also highlights the similarities. At the end of the day, Lelouch is still trying to do the same thing that his father and his brother were trying to do. Change the world to make it better for everyone. Just like they were, he's forcing his ideals onto the rest of the world by carrying out the Zero Requiem. If Charles and Schneisel were doing the wrong thing, doesn't that mean Lelouch is too? After he defeats Schneisel, Lelouch learns that there's still one obstacle he must overcome. The final opponent Lelouch has to face is Nunnally herself, the one for whom all of this violence has taken place. His consistent primary motivation. He had already decided that he had to stop giving Nunnally special treatment. That said, when it came down to it, he wasn't sure if he could bear the guilt of bending the will of someone he cares about so deeply. As he decided what to do, he talked to Nunnally to gauge where she stood. To his surprise, Nunnally expressed the idea that the Damocles could become a symbol of their hatred, just as Lelouch was trying to make himself such a symbol. Once he realized that she had a similar idea to the Zero Requiem, he regained his conviction, and was prepared to bear even this sin. Once his Geass is cast on Nunnally, he speaks his honest thoughts to her, knowing that she won't remember anything he's saying. Just recently, he said that she would never be able to do certain things on her own. While that's still true, she's shown inconceivable strength of will by being able to break the Emperor's Geass in the first place. He tells her that he loves her one more time, and quickly puts his mask back on before the effects of his Geass wear off. He has to maintain his facade even as Nunnally falls onto the ground and yells out that he's despicable and cowardly. He maintains his mask even though it hurts him. This is what separates Lelouch from an actual anime villain. He never stops genuinely caring about the people around him, but he sacrifices everything necessary, including his own soul and his own desires, to create the better world he sought from the very beginning, for Nunnally's sake, even if she hates him for it. The scene is tragic, but it solidifies Lelouch as a tragic hero. With no one left to oppose his sovereign majesty, he declares himself ruler of the world. Now all that's left is to carry out all of the remaining steps of the Zero Requiem. Unwittingly to anyone out of the loop, this very battle had become the penultimate step of his plan. Lelouch has successfully painted himself as the demon in the eyes of the world, and now all that was left was to remove the focal point of all that hatred. After all hope of anyone saving the world from the oppressive grips of its emperor dissipates, Zero, the symbol of rebellion against oppressive leaders, slays the demon in front of the very world. Lelouch, the demon, sold his soul for humanity's salvation.
They say if you fold 1,000 of these cranes, your wish will come true.
What about you? Do you wish for anything?
I wish the world was a gentler place.
Welcome back to this blast from the past. We're going to be re-uploading some old content, and what better place to start than my magnum opus, my greatest work. This also means we'll see a return of some of Hoodie's old Avatar videos, so stay tuned for that. I think I've since written a handful of scripts that are about as good or better than this one, but there's something uniquely charming about this kind of long, labor of love form of video. Thanks to all of our patrons for supporting the channel. Our Discord server is like a constant party where everyone invited knows Code Geass is a masterpiece. If you want in or just support what we do here, head over to patreon.com/KatoYT and pledge $1 to join. Otherwise, it would be a big help if you would like, comment, and share this video. Thank you all for listening to my dumb rants. Subscribe for more.